All right, thank you, Professor Casey. So as many of you may notice, I'm wearing a mask. I'm currently at the law school here at U of R, and we're required to wear a mask. I'm going to try and project and speak as clearly as possible, but I know that with a mask, sometimes things might get a little muddled. If at any time anyone has any issues hearing me, understanding me, or would just like some more clarification, please use the raise hand feature. It pops you up and makes a very clear note on my screen when that happens. Otherwise, I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists. We have Heather Farber. She's from Richmond Scans, or the Stop Child Abuse Now. I believe she also works with Richmond CASA as well. Janine Panzera is the head of the Henrico CASA here in Henrico. They're both wonderful. I actually work with Janine as a CASA here in Henrico, and she's actually a U of R alum. So anybody who has Aaron Campbell as their career advisor, they were classmates. So just funny little small world. But anyway, today we're going to go ahead and start out with just a brief spider law pride, exactly. We're going to start off with a few minutes just discussing who CASAs are, what they do, the sort of cases to which they're assigned, and the training that goes along with that. Then we're going to get into the respective programs of Henrico and Richmond. And then we're going to get into some personal stories about what CASAs have done. I'll be speaking as a current CASA, a new baby CASA here in Henrico. And I believe we'll have a more seasoned volunteer from Richmond as well. So you kind of get the best of both worlds there. Without further ado, I'll go ahead and hand it off to our panelists. Thank you very much for being here.
Chase, thanks so much for the introduction. And yeah, for those of you who are U of R law students, nice, good to see you guys. It's been more than a decade for me, so I wish I could have been back on campus, but of course, COVID is I think wreaking havoc for all of us, but thank you for having me. And yes, it's an honor to be here to talk about CASA. So we're gonna just hopefully give some overviews about who we are, what we do. I think it's a great fit for law students on a lot of different levels. It's the blend of the legal world of the child welfare system and the juvenile and domestic relations court, and then advocacy, which is really important. And so love the partnership with TRKC and the Carrico Pro Bono Center, so we're very fortunate for that. So we're going to start out actually with a video. So Heather is I'm going to speak for a little bit, and then I'm going to turn it over to Heather, and then we're going to have some conversation. So this is just a video that hopefully will pull at the heartstrings a little bit, but we'll certainly also give an overview of CASA and just the meaning and sort of why CASA is a part and a very important part of the juvenile and domestic relations court system. And then we'll kind of get into some of the specifics. So we'll start with that.
Oops, sorry.
Just to refresh your memory.
Dear Tim, when I first entered foster care, I was upset and sad about the whole situation. I was hurt. I was questioning why this was happening to me. In a weird way, I felt happy because I no longer had to endure pain from the people I was supposed to be able to trust the most. The day I first met you, I was very skeptical and unsure why you were at my group home. You told me you were going to stick around, and you did stick around. When I lived at home, my biological father was always at my sporting events. When I entered the system and no one was coming to my games, it was really hard. It made me lose my passion for sports. You being there gave me a reason to try again. We did a lot of things together, but you did something that no one else would. You brought me and my siblings together. Being separated from them was so difficult. The time you spent driving across the county so we could see each other made it possible for us to stay connected. One of the most important things you've helped me accomplish is stability. I've been in 8 different placements, but none of them felt like home. When I reached out to my old math teacher about being my foster parent, you were shocked, but impressed. Living with Charles and Jonathan has opened so much. It's not a foster home, it's just home. It's family. Through it all, you've supported me 100% and made sure I came first in every conversation. Over the years, I can see why you were tough on me and always on my case, making sure I'm on top of things. Now I know it's because you have my best interest in mind and want to make sure my goals are within reach.
You've taught me not to be afraid and be a better version of myself. Although I may not show it all the time, I truly am grateful because you've made me a better man. Love, Josh.
We got comfort, bro.
Deep within.
That's awesome, bro.
So that was just a little bit of maybe a little bit of a tearjerker, but just to show the kind of impact that our volunteers can have on these children. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what that means and what that looks like. But I think it's always helpful to have some perspective on just the history of CASA and where it came from. And it is very much enmeshed with the court system. And it was actually started in the late 70s by a judge, Judge David Sukup in Seattle, Washington. And that is actually where the National CASA headquarters are today. And it essentially was a program that he came up with just as a result of not having enough information to make a better decision for the child's case that he was hearing about. And it was literally a little girl who had suffered a significant amount of abuse and neglect. And he was sitting on the bench and just frustrated that he didn't have enough information. He had perspectives from the Department of Social Services. He had the perspectives and the advocacy that the parents' attorneys were providing, but he felt that nobody was there actually speaking for what this particular child needed to determine where she would be safe. And out of that, he, as he tells the story, he would say that he went to sleep that night and woke up after having dreamt about what could I do to fix the situation. And the answer that he came up with was, well, why can't we have an independent sort of arm of the judicial system that involves community members and volunteers who just want to speak up for children and ensure that they're safe and provide independent and unbiased information to help a judge make a better decision. And out of that, really sort of, he birthed the whole idea of the CASA program. And the quote here, just said, it terrified me to make decisions about children when I didn't have anybody there. And so out of that really became the CASA program and the model. And I mentioned that we are part of a national association, and I think Heather has some statistics on the next page, but there are nearly 1,000 CASA programs across the country. Sometimes you'll hear it as guardian ad litems. Now, for those in law school, in Virginia, a guardian ad litem is an attorney, but some CASA programs are also called GAL programs, but are still volunteer-based. But there are over 80,000 CASA advocates across the country that serve, 250,000 children, and it's a huge need, which we're going to talk about significantly. So boiling that down to what it looks like in Virginia, there are 27 different CASA programs across the Commonwealth. There are actually 5 here in the greater Richmond area. And so, of course, Heather and I are representing Henrico and Richmond CASA programs, which are very close to University of Richmond and VCU. But we do have sister programs in Chesterfield, Hanover, and Goochland, and we're very much covered the jurisdictions. And so the reason for this is that each CASA program serves a separate jurisdiction of the court. And so our cases, for example, in Henrico County, originate in front of the Henrico County Juvenile Domestic Relations Court. For Heather's program in the city of Richmond, her cases originate in the city of Richmond Juvenile Domestic Relations Court. We can have families that are all over, and some are transient just with the nature of challenges related to housing and housing instability, but they are originating in one or the other for our 2 programs of the Henrico or the Richmond City Juvenile Domestic Relations Court. I always say that child abuse knows no socioeconomic boundaries, and so it happens everywhere. It happens in the west end of Henrico County. It happens in the city of Richmond, and it also it's kind of an equal opportunity destroyer for children of all different ages. And so we serve children from birth to 18. We can serve older youth as well who have what we call aged out of the foster care system. So we can serve them through 21. But our programs essentially, for the most part, serve children from birth. And those sometimes we receive children who have experienced neglect in the form of they're in the NICU and going through withdrawal due to screening positive at birth for substances, and there's concern for that, through the older youth who just don't seem to have anyone anymore. And so the children that we serve come in a variety of different ways to our different programs. And I think we'll get into a little bit more specifics about some of the differences between our programs in Henrico and Richmond. But children can be living in the home of their parents, with relatives, foster parents in homes, or group homes or residential treatment facility centers. And those will just vary as to where they are based on the needs of the child. We're always looking in the child welfare system to ensure that children could be with family if it's safe. And then we're looking at relatives just to try to keep them with those family members if it's safe. But sometimes due to the abuse and neglect that children experience, they need a higher level of assistance, and that could come from being removed from their home and placed in a foster home or some type of residential treatment facility. And so that is essentially kind of who we are at the core, and just sort of the overview of what CASA looks like from a national perspective, and then a little bit more from the local level and state level. So now, of course, you might say, well, Janine, thanks for that, but what the heck does a CASA actually do? Because we haven't really gotten into it. So now it's probably a good time to do that. So this is a nice infographic that I think will hopefully give us a chance to talk and just hear a little bit about what CASA is. So CASA volunteers are advocates. And so when we talk about advocacy, it means that we are looking at what is in the best interest of the child. And for those of you who are interested in family law, or our social workers who are here, that's a very, very important principle that really governs the whole child welfare system as to what is in the best interest of these children. For those in law, there's actually, factors that are in the code that, the courts are looking at to determine what is in the best interest. But we are looking at a bunch of different things and a variety of different factors when we talk about best interest. But what we're ultimately doing is wanting to provide an independent an unbiased perspective to a judge as to what is going on in the circumstances of this child's life. And so here are some of the examples. And so we're learning. I always say that CASA volunteers are very much listeners and active listeners. A lot of times I think we have to understand that the child welfare system is a bureaucratic system. It is very much underfunded, and it is also very much overburdened with way too many children, not enough social workers, not enough guardian ad litem attorneys, and they're very, very, very busy. And CASA is appointed to the cases that are really the most difficult because they're involving allegations of abuse or neglect, and that is really what has to have an underlying allegation in order for CASA to be appointed to a case. I should also add that the only way that CASA is appointed is by the court system. So we are essentially serving and at the service of the judges, in this case, either Henrico County or Richmond City Juvenile and Domestic Relations Court. And so once a judge decides that there is an allegation of abuse or neglect, or has made a finding that a child has been abused or neglected, that is the impetus to appoint CASA. And once CASA is appointed, our role is to really uncover everything that we can about the child's circumstances. We want to know who they are. We want to know who their family is, their parents, their relatives, siblings, and then all the other sort of collaterals involved in their life, teachers, the therapists, counselors, maybe probation officers. It's just going to vary very much case to case. But we are learning and gathering information about the child's circumstances, and we are engaging consistently with that child because we are an advocate for them. So in order to be the best advocate, we need to know that child. We need to know what their needs are. We need to know, what issues or concerns or barriers may be for the family, and we need to understand what their wishes are. We also work really, really closely with a lot of other case professionals, and we're very much a collaborative entity. That could be with guardian ad litem attorneys, attorneys for the parents, social workers, therapists, teachers, probation officers. We're often all coming together to provide essentially what we would call wraparound services to really think about what these children need in order to provide ameliorative or remedial services to improve their situation. And that's where then we make recommendations directly to the court that is included in a report. And so a very, very big component, and really arguably the final work product of what a volunteer does, is after gathering all the information and working collaboratively with case professionals and engaging with the child and the family, we are putting that information together in a written report that is going directly to the judge that is hearing that child's case. And that report can be very lengthy, and it can include a lot of information, certainly everything that's been gathered, but also all the information that has been verified. So we are also providing additional information based on medical records, school records, mental health records, substance abuse records. The list can go on and on of the information that we're gathering to be able to really provide factual and verified information to the court to allow the judge to make a better decision. And so that is what is included in the CASA reports that go directly over to the court. And of course, it includes our observations, just because we do have in-person visits with children and their families, and we can make those observations as to the relationship, as to what's going well, and maybe as to, where some areas for improvement or strengthening for that family could be. And then lastly, those reports do include specific recommendations that, based on our involvement and based on our active participation with the family and the children, we're making very specific recommendations to the judge as to what CASA believes is in the child's best interest. And that would be and could include where they live, whether they stay with their family, whether it's not safe and may need to go to a different relative, but also for services. And that's a big, big component of what we're able to do, is because CASA is only assigned to one child or sibling group, maybe two at a time. we're really able to gather that information and monitor the situation and really identify what the needs are for the family, to then be able to make really good recommendations to the court as to what the child needs and what the family needs to hopefully strengthen that family's situation. And then going forward, we continue to monitor that case and the child's situation, monitor compliance with any orders that the court actually enters that day at the court hearing. And we stay with these children and stay with their cases until it is closed at court. So that could be a few months, that could be a couple of years. And so it just depends on the type of case and the circumstances of that case in terms of how long the judge wants to review it. And so this infographic here hopefully kind of shows what we do and how we do it in as simple as a way as possible. So when we talk about CASA, you know, we always have to talk about, especially for those of us who write grants and look for community support, so what? You know, so you say, well, Janine, that's nice, that sounds lovely, but what does that mean? And what we know is that we make a huge, huge difference in the child welfare system, and there are proven better outcomes for children who have been appointed a CASA advocate. And part of it truly is that the system is so overburdened and underfunded that we're able to provide that extra set of eyes and ears for the court to help the judge make better decisions for these children. And you know, the studies show that just one adult who cares about a child can make a significant difference in that child's life. So, you know, for those of us who think back to, you know, our childhood, you know, did you have a teacher? Did you have a coach, a mentor, just someone, you know, if it wasn't family that you could depend upon, that makes a huge difference for children in building and developing resiliency to be able to move forward and to, you know, become productive members of society despite, you know, potentially horrible abuse and neglect that they have suffered. But what we also know that studies have shown specifically related to CASA, that when children in the child welfare system have a CASA, they're more likely to find safety and permanency in a loving home. And they're actually likely to find that more quickly. And when we say permanency, it means if a child is in a placement, so in foster care, you know, are they able to return home? Are they able to go to a relative, or, you know, are they able to be adopted? And we're, as advocates, sort of nudging that system quickly and as fast as we can, so we can have those children experience that permanency faster. They're more likely to succeed in school, and a big piece of that is we sometimes advocate for children to be able to remain in their school setting, because that's very important for stability. And, you know, teachers are a huge benefit to the children, and guidance counselors, and frankly, all school personnel administration for these children. And oftentimes it's where kids sort of find safety and security if they're not receiving that at home. And then I think also a really nice statistic is that they're half as likely to re-enter the foster care system for those that were actually served by and with a CASA advocate. So we know that there are better outcomes. Anecdotally, I could sit here and talk for 2 hours or more about just, you know, how the judges, you know, will just be so thankful for the work of our advocates, because at least we're giving them better information. And they're so thankful that volunteers are spending their time and dedicating a lot of, I think, arguably one of the you know, most important commodities that we have is our time, and very much giving of you know, our hearts as well to these children. But we also know that there are actual specific outcomes that have been measured that we're able to share. So that's kind of what we know. So we're going to get into, I guess maybe before we get into more specifics, maybe I'll take just a pause and a breather. Are there any questions based on what I've shared, just in terms of the overview of CASA and what the programs, you know, are and what we do?
Janine, there are no questions that are in the chat, and I don't see any blue hands raised.
So before I turn it over to Heather, I'm just going to kind of finish on a couple of things that we just sort of say boundaries, just as, you know, you all are learning more about CASA and also understanding the program and thinking about, you know, if this might be the right, you know, fit for you. There are certain things that we don't do, and that's for a lot of different reasons, some of which is some liability, but we don't transport children or their families. That's, you know, lots of different reasons there, but we don't do that. Because I mentioned that we are often privy to records on children, the records of the family members, we have to follow very strict confidentiality rules when it comes to medical records and substance abuse records and mental health and dental records. So we're very, very much having to follow strict confidentiality. We don't talk to the child directly about the abuse or neglect that they suffered. Oftentimes the children will share with the CASA volunteer because they've developed a very, very close relationship, but we are not what we would call forensic interviewers to actually interview the children as to what actually occurred. And for good reason, we leave that to the professionals who have, you know, to the professionals who have studied this. And we also don't want children to have to change their stories or tell multiple people what occurred, just in the event that it does become an investigation and potentially criminal charges are filed. We need to preserve the sort of sanctity of that investigation. And then lastly, we don't provide specific services to the children. So, you know, we are certainly providing and advocating for children, but we are not in this role lawyers, counselors, teachers, mentors. You know, we're not giving gifts to the children, things like that. So we, you know, are trying to maintain, and the reason for this is to maintain that impartial, unbiased, independent perspective, that we are just gathering information for the judge to help a judge make better decisions for these children. And so we definitely want and need to maintain those boundaries so we can do that as well as possible. I did see a couple of questions pop up. And I think they were good questions. So Salua, good question about the length of one appointment. Always a hard one for us to answer specifically because it's going to depend a little bit on the type of case, which we'll talk about. And I think that Heather is going to get into this a little bit. But I think each of our programs ask for a commitment of at least 1 year of service as CASA, but we really, really ask that if you take on a child's case, that it, you know, you see it through until it closes. And that can be, it just depends on the length of time and the type of case. Part of that is because we certainly don't want to be, I like to say, don't drop the ball on these kids who've already had a lot of people who have potentially disappointed them and come in and out of their lives. So it's very, very important for us to have consistency, and of course consistency in their advocacy. And I always like to say too that CASA oftentimes is one of the only professionals that is involved in these children's cases from start to finish, and we end up becoming the historian of their story. And so it's really important to have consistency there. So again, as we present and you just learn more about CASA, time commitment is definitely something to be cognizant of. And then Mandy, good question too on just the description of Tim in the video. You know, that was really kind of a pull at the heartstrings video and not to be taken sort of, I guess, as seriously in terms of what his role was. That was definitely a different CASA program, and there are different programs. Less in Virginia, we are regulated by the Department of Criminal Justice Services, and we have some pretty strict guidelines that we need to follow. So most of our programs are very consistent in the boundaries that I just shared, but they may have had some additional flexibility for their volunteers in terms of, I think he may have driven him and you know, gone to his, you know, games and things like that. So it's just a little bit different. We try to maintain that very professional boundary of we are an observer and we are the eyes and ears of the court system. And I think what I'm going to do is then, and Elizabeth, I have another good question. And Heather, I think that you're going to go into this a little bit more for Elizabeth's question. So I'm going to turn it over to Heather to keep chatting. And then again, we will have some time at the end too to open it up for some more questions and answers and conversations.
Thanks, Janine. Yeah, I will get to that question shortly. First of all, I want to say if anyone's feeling intimidated by what you've heard so far, don't worry, you are not going into this alone. You would be assigned a CASA staff member after training, and that person would be there to support your work. So we would help you, guide you through your case, help you figure out who you need to talk to and what kinds of questions you need to be asking. We would always review your court report before it gets submitted to the judge. So you never need to worry that you're submitting something that is incorrect or unhelpful. We're going to be providing edits and suggestions for additional information to include in your report. And it always gets kind of the CASA program seal of approval before it gets submitted to the professionals. We also will go to court with you so that we know what's going on in the case. It kind of give you an idea of what may happen next and what you'll need to do next. And we are here to listen to you vent and answer questions for you and really just make sure that you're not going through this alone. Our cases are not black and white. They're not straightforward. Sometimes crazy things happen on the case, and so you'll just call us up and we can provide some guidance on what to expect next. So what are we looking for in a CASA volunteer? First of all, we like to be really upfront with the time commitment. We know that this role doesn't work for everybody, and we want you to have a clear understanding of what you're signing up for. So as Janine mentioned, the Henrico program, they ask for a commitment of a year. We actually ask for a commitment of 18 months with the Richmond program. We found that on average, our cases last about 18 months. So of course, sometimes things get wrapped up quickly. Sometimes it could be going on for 3 years. So we really want to make sure that our volunteers are able to see that case through from beginning to end and be that caring, consistent adult in a child's life while they're going through a lot of inconsistency. We say that this volunteer role takes about 10 to 15 hours a month. You would be visiting your child once or twice a month, depending on the program. You'd be attending court hearings related to your child, and we'd also ask that you be available during the day occasionally to speak with your case manager and call different professionals that are involved in the case. Our program assigns a volunteer either to one child or to a sibling group. So if 2 sisters enter the foster care system together, it makes sense for them to just have one CASA volunteer. And typically you would just be working one case at a time. So one child or a sibling group, but you wouldn't have to keep track of a lot of other kids because again, the point of this role is that we are not the Department of Social Services or guardian ad litems where we have a bunch of different cases. Our volunteers really have the time to be able to get to know that one family really well and make sure they're not falling through the cracks. So our volunteers, we're looking for individuals who have strong written skills as well as verbal skills. You'll be writing court reports and then also representing our organization in the community, explaining your role to all the different professionals. And so we ask that you have good communication skills in order to be able to do all of that. We ask that our volunteers are objective and open-minded. When a child comes before the court, if it's safe, we always want the child to be able to be reunited with their parents or a relative because families have better outcomes when they're able to stay together. So we really want to make sure that our volunteers are open-minded to where the case might lead. We might be recommending services to strengthen the family in hopes that the family can be reunited. And so we just want to make sure that people come to this work being objective. You'll obviously need to have good skills when interacting with children, but you'll also be interacting with families and professionals. We're asking for people who are responsible and who can manage their time well and are deadline driven. This is a very independent role with some strict deadlines, since you're writing court reports that by law have to be submitted 3 business days before the court hearing. And so we ask for you to submit paperwork at certain timeframes so that we can make sure that we're able to effectively advocate for these kids. We also, by law, have to have volunteers who are over the age of 21. We ask that if you think you might have a conflict of interest, just reach out to us and ask. So this might be if you were, for example, interning at the courts or for a guardian ad litem, or if you have an internship with the Department of Social Services or a foster care agency, or something like that. That could be a potential conflict of interest. So we would just want to talk about it and see if we would be able to assign you a case that would not be that have a conflict. We ask that our volunteers have access to a car, since they will be visiting their children in their homes typically, and access to a computer, since you'll be typing up CASA reports. We also do background checks before training. So if you had any concern about something that might pop up on your background check, let us know so we could let you know if that would be a deal breaker. And no expected major life changes in the near future. So we know that this is a really time-intensive role and it's a long commitment. We want to make sure that all of our volunteers are able to stay in the life of this child for as long as they are involved in the court system. And so we ask you to be really thoughtful before you go through training about what your next year and a half might look like, and making sure that you're able to fulfill this commitment so that we're making sure we're not letting our kids down. So if after today you decide you are interested in becoming a CASA volunteer, we would love to have you. The first step is to submit an application, and you can find that on either of our websites. And then we would review your application and then bring you in for an interview. We also will conduct reference checks and background checks. And we want to make sure that we're looking out for the best interests of our children and only having people be assigned to a case if we think they're going to be a good fit. And so if you are accepted, the first step is going through a training class. So this is 30 or more hours of training that would be led by the CASA program staff. And it's really to give you an introduction into how the court system works, how the foster care system works, helping to understand challenges our families may be facing, helping you to understand the specifics of being a CASA volunteer, what you can and cannot do, how to write a CASA report, everything you'll need to know to hit the ground running when you get assigned to your first case. All right, so I could talk all day about why I find this to be meaningful work, but I think it's really helpful to hear from CASA volunteers. So first, I'm going to turn it over to Morgan Berry. She is currently in the U of R School of Law, so some of you may know her, and she has been a volunteer with the Richmond CASA program for a little over a year. So Morgan, I'll turn it over to you so you can share a little bit about your experience.
Thanks, Heather. Hi, everyone. My name is Morgan. I'm currently a 1L at U of R Law. I went to VCU for undergrad, and I have a bachelor's in psychology and criminal justice. And like Heather said, I've been a CASA for about a year and a half now. I found CASA through just a Google search when I was trying to find a way to get more involved in our community. And I wanted to find an organization that involved children as well as the law. I was a nanny for a little while, and so doing things with children are really important to me and being in that community. And then because I was applying to law school, I wanted to do something where I could sort of get an intro into that. And I had never heard of CASA before. So when I found out about the organization and it just sort of hit all of those points, I was so excited and amazed. And I thought it was really cool to find somewhere that I could get that sort of intro into the court system, because there aren't a lot of opportunities to volunteer in the legal field unless you're actively an attorney or in law school. So I thought that was an amazing opportunity. So for me specifically, my cases look a little different than some others. I specifically request, if available, to work with infants because I really love babies. And these cases are a little bit different from working with school-age children or teenagers. Obviously, you can't interview or talk to a baby. So my visits look a little more like discussing things with the foster parents that the baby's placed with, talking about things such as doctor's visits and developmental milestones, eating and sleeping habits, and visitations with bio parents, things like that. So you're required to meet with your child, at least for Richmond CASA, twice a month. And so currently I'm doing video visits because of COVID, but usually I would go and meet with the child and whoever they are placed with for those visits. And the foster families I've worked with have been absolutely phenomenal. They're amazing and so helpful. I've learned so much from them. I'm currently on my second case. Actually, today is my child's birthday, so I'm gonna go ahead and text the foster mom as soon as I can. The foster families are really helpful in communicating. They make it really easy. And sometimes you'll be with a child that might be with their bio parents or another relative. It really depends on the case. And so far I've had 2 cases. I'm on my second one, but the first one was the first one I've been able to see through all of the way. And the baby had been placed with a foster family, and one of their relatives was doing everything she could and working really hard to get custody of him. And we had a hearing one day, and we didn't think that much would happen or change. However, that day, the judge decided to grant custody to the relative, and it was just really emotional and incredibly sweet. It was an amazing moment. I loved getting to be there through the whole entire process and getting to watch the baby grow and change, and watching the relative do everything they needed to do to get custody, and then just getting to see like the excitement and joy of the relative getting to have custody of him and take him home that day. It was really amazing. It made all of the hours and time and hard work absolutely completely worth it. My experience as a CASA has definitely shown me an avenue for things I want to explore in the law, and maybe do things for pro bono work and working with children. It's incredibly rewarding, and you know that you're really truly helping someone. There are so many things I've done and continue to do as a CASA that I really think have benefited me specifically in my law school career. To complete your training, you're required to spend a certain number of hours in the courtroom. I'm not sure exactly how it is now because of COVID, but I think it was 5 hours when I was doing my training. And that was 100% my favorite part of all of our trainings, because it made me really comfortable with being in a courtroom and getting to see how the judge works and how everyone interacts. One thing that I think really helped me most in law school specifically has been writing the court reports. Like we mentioned, the court reports are required a certain amount of time before there's a hearing, and they go directly to the judge. And so you get to talk about everything you've seen over the past however many months, how the child is doing, how maybe the biological parents are doing, just all of that. And I think it really has taught me how to write professionally, specifically in a legal setting. And I mean, how many positions, volunteer positions, allow you to write to a judge? You can't get better than that. It's amazing. I think it's a wonderful opportunity that legal employers will be really interested in, specifically for the people in law school. When I was hired as a paralegal at the firm I worked for before I started school, the attorneys were incredibly interested in seeing that I had my experience as a CASA on my resume, because it's not something that everyone has, and it really makes you stand out. And specifically about the time requirements, I've really not had any issues with the time commitment and keeping up with my visits, writing reports. So if that's something that you might be worried about that might be stopping you from volunteering, I would definitely say don't worry too much about it. Think realistically, but don't let it scare you off. Overall, I've absolutely loved my experiences at CASA, and I'm definitely going to be volunteering as long as I can. This organization is amazing. The people are wonderful, and it has a super special place in my heart.
Thanks, Morgan. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Chase Whitaker, who recently went through the Henrico CASA training program.
Yeah, thanks, Heather. So I was actually at CASA back in San Diego, California, too, for a little bit. So I guess I'm technically on my second and third case. But as was discussed, the different jurisdictions, the different states especially, have very different rules. So for example, back there, you could drive a kid if they met certain conditions, but here that's just generally a no-no. But, oh Lord, how can I talk about how amazing this job is? You heard a lot from Morgan about the sort of legal end, so I want to try and give a little bit about the social work end of things. My undergraduate degree is in public health, but I was raised by a social worker who worked mostly with the elderly, but it's an excellent job for social workers, and it's a great job for lawyers too, because it shows the more human aspect behind the paperwork that I think it tends to get lost when you do a lot of work before the courts and on this subject matter. You kind of get a little jaded, and it kind of just becomes, all right, well, what are the charges now? All right, well, mom did this, dad did this. All right, so that's what we're going to do. When you meet with these people, you find out they are the same kind of people that you'd see at the grocery store, at Target, that are wandering around, that pick up kids from their schools. They're just everyday people that find themselves in a really difficult position. Working with these kids, as was said, you get to be the only person that's pretty consistent in their lives, despite a whole lot of change that's just constantly going on. And because of that, a lot of times these kids might not want to talk to you at first, because to them, you're just another adult that showed up and in their mind is probably going to leave. But after you are there and you show up on time and you are there for them and you listen to them and you ask them what their thoughts are on things, they start to see you as an advocate. And a lot of times the CASA ends up being the very first person to ask these kids, so what do you want? How do you feel about this? Because the parents' attorneys get real wrapped up with the parents. The guardian ad litem's have so many cases going on that they don't really have time to visit with these kids one-on-one and really get to know them. And social workers, bless you. I know that you all are going to have an incredible amount of work too. And so it can just be hard to get to know, really, really get to know these kids. I met with my first CASA kid here in Henrico. We actually have the exact same birthday, obviously different years, but we have the same birthday. And I met with him a couple weeks ago, and we just sat and talked about video games and TV shows and things that he liked. And I found out afterward that I was the first professional in this case that he was willing to talk to. And it was because I wasn't asking him, so what happened? I wasn't asking him legal questions. I didn't show up in a suit and tie. I just sat there and talked to him about what he wanted to talk about. And now I have more meetings and video chat scheduled with him because he wants to talk. And it gives you a little bit of a window into the ability of CASAs to really work with these kids. And the judges love us too. I was in a hearing on Tuesday, and the judge literally took a full 60 seconds to talk about how great CASAs are and how much he loves them and how great a program it is, because these judges are really flying blind a lot of times. They do see CPS's reports and they see the parents' reports, but they know that the truth is usually somewhere in the middle. And they don't know where that is all the time unless they have a CASA. They have a second pair of eyes that are able to really follow along with this case. I don't want to take up too much more time. I'm more than happy to speak with anyone about my experiences here, things like that. But for now, I'll go ahead and turn it back over. I can hang around after the meeting as well to answer any questions anyone has. So thank you.
Thanks, Chase. I will also say too that I'm sure that for those in the law school, Morgan and Chase, thank you for both sharing your stories. And then for those of you who might know Tim Solanke, he's a volunteer with Henrico, and Adam Winston is on our board actually. So please certainly, you know, reach out and touch base with Adam or Tim or Chase or Morgan, you know, to talk to them directly about some of their experiences too. But yes, any questions though from anyone, or if you want to ask Chase and Morgan more.
So I just saw a question from Elizabeth regarding conflicts with time. The beautiful thing is I as soon as I get appointed a case, I emailed my professors just saying, hey, I'm a CASA, this is what a CASA is. Because of the nature of these cases, it can be hard to predict when court dates are, if something comes up, but I'll let you know in advance. Every single professor, both in undergrad and here, has always said, that's totally fine, totally understand, that's awesome that you're doing that, you can take off whatever time you need to do that. The court times are usually going to be during the week for obvious reasons. The courts actually handle specific types of cases on specific days. So if, for example, you have a juvenile delinquent case, so a kid who's facing criminal-like charges, that will pretty much always be handled on Mondays in Henrico. If you have an abuse and neglect case, that's more likely to be handled on a Tuesday in Henrico. So it'll be fairly consistent, but there are certain emergency situations where there's a federal timeline that has to be followed, and so it might not fall on that day. But every professor I've ever talked to has always been more than happy to just say, nope, go do what you need to do, totally excused, not a problem.
Also, just to speak.
Oh, go ahead. So I was saying, go ahead, Morgan.
Just to speak to that also, the hearings, it depends, but all of the ones I've been to have been pretty incredibly short. So I wouldn't say you're very unlikely to be in court for like 4 hours or so. Like it's typically, mine have been about 20 minutes, maybe. Some have been less, some have maybe been a little bit more, but they're typically fairly short. And so it is pretty easy to work things in with your schedule.
Yeah.
Janine and Heather, can I just want to be mindful of time? There's another question that has come through that regarding whether can you be a CASA volunteer if you are a licensed attorney?
I would say that you can be, as long as there's not a conflict of interest. So we had recently somebody who worked fairly closely, was in the same office as a guardian ad litem that we work with on many of our cases. And so we thought that would be just a little too close. But as long as you are in some other type of law or in a role that wouldn't directly come into contact with the families that we're serving, then that would be fine.
Yeah, we have, thank you for the question. We definitely have had licensed attorneys and frankly, you know, folks who are no longer practicing, you know, who want to volunteer their time. But yeah, as Heather said, as long as there's not like a direct conflict, it's actually a way for folks to stay within the legal system, but almost do some pro bono work that feels, you know, feels good with children and families, especially if they're, you know, doing maybe tax law or real estate that they don't have, you know, as much of involvement with, let's say, the community. So it's a really good question, good fit though too.
So being mindful of time, I will go ahead and give you all our contact information. As we mentioned, the Henrico CASA program and Richmond CASA program are fairly similar. There are a couple of small differences, but it's really up to you where you would want to volunteer. So if you want to follow up and ask more about our individual programs before you make a decision, we are happy to chat with you more. Here is our contact information and the websites that you can go to learn more about each of our programs, and that should provide you with some more information. We could also follow up with an email and just provide you guys with some additional written information. And don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions. I thank you guys so much for joining us today. I hope you learned more about our program and will consider volunteering with us. I think that this is a really rewarding volunteer opportunity. It really allows you to feel like you're making a difference in the life of one child and one family and feel like you're making a lasting impact. So I hope you'll consider it. If you decide it's not for you, I hope you'll spread the word to some others. who might be interested in learning more. So thank you all so much for joining us.
All right, and as I said, I'll stick around if any of the students from either VCU or U of R have any questions. I'll try and answer them the best of my ability. And if I can't answer anything specifically because it gets into confidentiality or anything specific, I'll refer you to either Janine or Heather as appropriate. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you all so much. I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and thank you to everyone who has attended. I will send a follow-up email to all who have registered, and once our link is live, I'll do a follow-up email as well then. But thank you, Heather and Janine, so much for joining us today. Thank you, Chase, one of our Carrico Center student program managers, for organizing today's program. I hope everyone has a safe Friday the 13th and continue to be safe during this season. A phrase an attorney in the community shared with me is one I'm adopting: stay positive, test negative. And I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care.
Thanks, Tara. Thanks for hosting.
Thank you.